I'm going to show you how you can set up sign-in with Apple using the Firebase cloud platform, Firebase Auth, and yeah, we're going to do that with the sign in or sign up with Apple button. So the first thing that we need to do is set up our project to do that. I'm going to assume that you already know how to create a Firebase project and connect your app with it. So we're not going to go over that. But to get started, we'll just select our project up here on the top left. Select signing and capabilities. And this button right here to add a new capability, we're going to click on that. You can search for the word sign and double click right here to add this capability to your app. Xcode will handle adding the necessary information to your profile so that it will work for you. And then we should be good here. The other thing that we need to do is set up Firebase. So we're going to switch over to that real quick here. So in our Firebase project, we'll want to click on authentication. We'll click on get started. And these are all of the sign-in providers. We want to do the Apple one here. We'll just click on it and just flip on enabled. You could ignore the rest of this stuff here for now, and then we'll just click save. And that's all you have to do to set it up. Now we can get into the code to add the button to the view and make it work. So in your view controller, wherever you're going to add this, we're just going to go over a basic implementation, a very basic way to add this to your view. And then the second part of the video, I'll show you how to add this to like a real project and how that would look. So first off, we're going to need to add a couple of things here. Of course, we're going to want to import our Firebase Auth module. We're going to need to import authentication services. And we're going to need to import CryptoKit. And then up here, we'll create our Apple button. We're going to make this private, a private constant here. And it's a type AS authorization Apple ID button. And you'll notice there's a couple of different initializers, a couple of different ways to create that. We're going to go with this one that has the type and style options. And for this one, we can just hit the period button and you can see we have, again, a bunch of different options. So these are the main three right here with a K. We have a continue, a sign in, and a sign up. That controls the text that shows up on your button. We'll go with continue for now. And then for the style, we can have black, white, none, or a white outline. We're going to go with black, which will be a black button with white text. Next, we're going to create a private extension for our view controller down here. That'll be where we create our function to set up the view. And we will call that function from view.did_load right here. So when we launch our app, view.did_load will get called, and it will call our setup view function here. Our background color is already set because we're using a storyboard, so we don't really need to worry about that. So we'll just go straight into adding our button to the screen. So we're going to use constraints to lay this out. And when we do that, we have to set this property equal to false. If we don't set it to false and try to set some anchors to lay it out on the screen, you know, the width and the height and the position, it won't work. And we'll actually see some errors in the console or in the log when we go to do that. We're going to give it a corner radius. And we will add it to our view. Now that we have the button added to the view, we can set its constraints. we can define the anchors and lay out the button. So we'll do that now. We'll set the bottom anchor equal to our safe area bottom anchor, and we'll move it up just 72 points from the bottom there. Next, we'll go ahead and set the width. I like to define a constant for the width, and I usually make that 300. The reason for that is because most devices are going to be wider than that 300, and 300 will give us enough spacing on the edges to always kind of be in the middle of the screen. I think the older iPhone SE width was only 320 points, so this seems to work pretty well in the vast majority of cases. And we'll go ahead and set the height anchor here, and I'm going to set it to a height of 52. And then the last step is to put it in the middle of the screen. It's center X anchor. And that's going to be equal to our views center X anchor. And you'll notice I'm setting is active equals to true on each one of these. That's important. That's what actually activates the constraint. So let's go ahead and run it and see if this works. If it does, we should see a black button on the screen. And there it is. And that's how we lay out about the continue with Apple button. If we wanted to change the text, again, we can just change this property right here, and it will automatically change the text on our screen. You can see now it says sign in with Apple. Right now, if you click on it, nothing will happen. We're going to go over actually putting that into a project in part 2. So now we're in our social media app that we're creating, and I'm going to show you how to do the sign in with Apple button in a production type of application, a real world scenario. So in this one right now, we've got it set up right where we left off. We can build and run the app, and you'll see we have a white screen, and our button will show up down here at the bottom when the app finishes launching here. There we go. So this is our sign in with Apple button. It doesn't do anything yet, but we're going to change that. So, and again, we're integrating this with Firebase, so it will allow us to access our data and stuff after we've signed in. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is handle when a user clicks on our button to sign in. To do that, we're going to create a new extension down here. I really like to break my code up into logical chunks, so you're going to see this a lot. Let's call this handle Apple ID request. It won't take any parameters, and it's not going to return anything. And we're going to do some stuff. So Apple, as part of the request, they take what's called a nonce or an n once. And it's something that you can use to compare to make sure that your request actually came from you, and it's a type of security measure that we implement. So I'm not going to go into all the detail about how it works, but that's the basic gist of it. So we're going to put this up here. We haven't written our function yet to get that, but we will. And then we want to keep a reference to it. So up here at the top of our file, we're going to create a variable to store that value. And it's just going to be called current. I'm going to call it nonce. Other people call it n once. I think it just, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so there we go. That's going to store it for us. there we go. Xcode was being slow equals, and this will equal our nonce when we have it created there. So I'm commenting those out right now because we don't have the values quite yet. We're going to create those in a minute. So then once we've got that, we're going to create what's called an Apple ID provider. And it's an AS authorization Apple ID provider, just with an empty set of parentheses there on the end. And then we're going to create a request with that. So we'll have a request provider dot create request. And then we're going to set a couple properties on here. So the first one has to do with the scopes that we're going to ask for. So a scope is either an email or a full name. In this case, we're going to ask for both of them. The user can still choose which ones they want to provide when they're presented with the sign in with Apple flow. The second property is this nonce. So again, like I was saying, it can be used to verify with your token. So it's just an additional security measure. It's not required, but it is good practice to do this. So, and again, we haven't implemented that quite yet, so we'll leave that out for now. And then we're going to have a reference to a AS authorization controller that handles the requests. This takes an array of requests. We're just going to pass it the first one, well, the only one we have. And then we're going to set its delegate equal to self. That means that this class is going to handle any callbacks to that delegate. And then the last step is to perform the requests. It's going to fire off and try to sign the user in. So we have this error here. That's okay. We'll take care of that in a minute. We're going to finish writing this stuff up first. So to do that, all I did was copied and pasted these from another project because it's a lot to write out, and quite honestly, you don't really need to understand what's going on here. All that this does is it generates a random string for us. It uses this as our available characters, and all of this stuff just creates a random string. That's all it does. So that's all this entire function does. So up here where we originally commented this out, we're going to uncomment it and instead call our function. And then we can set it here. And here we're going to want to encrypt it. So this will take a parameter. I don't know why it's not populating, but we're going to pass it in here. So we're using this other function to SHA it. This encrypts it, creates a hash from our data, from our string here, and then returns it. This uses CryptoKit, and that's why we needed to include it. And that will set that property here. And then the last error is this delegate saying that we don't conform. And that's okay. We're going to do that down here at the bottom. We're going to create a new extension. This one has to be public because we are conforming to a delegate. So we need to have it as a public extension versus a private one. Controller delegate. There we go. And there's going to be a couple of methods that we're going to implement here. First one is did complete with error and did complete with authorization. So in this one, if there was an error, we're going to display an error message to the user on that. On this one, if it was successful, this is the one that we're most interested in, we get to perform some checks. So the first check that we would want to do is a guard statement for a credential. So we'll do credential equals authorization.credential as the AS authorization Apple ID credential. If we don't have that, then we'll just go ahead and return early. The next thing that we're going to look for is what's called the identity token. Oh, I missed my let there. Token equals credential dot identity token. If we can't find that, then we'll just return early. Once we have the token, we're going to want to turn that into a string because we're going to use that with the Firebase authentication service. So guard let token string equals string. We'll use the data and encoding initializer. We'll pass in our token. And the encoding will be UTF-8. And if that doesn't work, we also want to return early. And then we need to create what's called a OAuth provider credential that we can use with Apple Sign-In. So we can just do this. Oops. OAuth equals OAuth provider. This is included in the Firebase Auth library. Credential. Let's see. We want this one. So this one's going to be apple.com because that's the provider that we're using. The token is the token string that we created. And the raw nonce, that's going to be our current nonce, but I think it's optional. So we probably should unwrap it first up here. And we can just use nonce here. So let's just call this credential. This is our OAuth credential. Now that we have all of this stuff, now we do this step to actually sign in with Firebase. And the way that we do that, and you can read it in the Firebase documents, or I can just show it you here. So that's auth.auth sign in with a credential. And we're passing an OAuth credential here, and the result and our error. So in here is where we would handle the error. We might display an alert or something like that to the user if we wanted to. And then if there is no error, we're going to go ahead and grab the information that was provided from sign in with Apple. And it's important that we do this because they only give it to us the first time. So we can say let first name equals the credential full name dot given name, and then the last name is credential dot full name dot family name, and their email address is the credential dot email. So then that's what we're going to do with it, is store it in the database once we get it. And in another function, that's where you would check to see if they already have an account in your database. If they don't, then we're going to create a new account for them, and I'll show you how to do that as well. So before that, now that we have these implemented, let's pop back up here into our function, this error went away, so that's great. But we still need to add this as a target. So to do that, we just say Apple button dot add target. The target will be self because this is the class that the method is defined in. Our method, and you notice here this is an Objective-C method. That means we're going to need to append this at Objective-C before we have the function declaration. And it's going to be called handle Apple ID request, and it's going to be when they touch up inside. So now when they tap on the button, it's going to call this function. Once Apple does its stuff with the user, it's either going to succeed or fail. If it does fail for some reason, let's just go ahead and display an alert to the user. We're just going to do that with a basic alert controller. We'll say error, could not sign in. And this will just be an alert. We will add an action here. And pass in nil for the handler because we don't need to do anything with it. And we'll present that to the user. We'll present the alert, we'll make it animated, and we're not going to do anything once it completes, so that can be nil. So now if there is, for some reason, some error that happens when they try to sign in, we'll let them know. They should know from Apple already, but if for something else happens, we can display that alert to them. So now we should be good. We've got our button on the screen, and in fact, nothing will have changed on the UI. There's still just going to be our button sitting there. But when the user taps on it now, and I can't remember if I am signed in or not. I'm not. So, yep, and there's our error where it couldn't sign in. So you can customize that to be whatever you need. After the user does sign in, we want to, again, check to see if they already have an account and go from there. So that's going to have to do with if you have Firebase's Firestore set up, which we haven't yet in this video. So I think we're going to handle that a little bit later. But for now, I think all we're going to want to do is move to another view controller if the user is in fact signed in. So what we can do is we'll create another function here. We'll just call it has account. We'll pass in our first name, our last name, and our email that we got from the Apple ID credential. And we're just going to say to do check if has account when we have Firebase Firestore set up. But for now, we're just going to create a new view controller. Set its background color so that we know that it actually moved. And then we are within a navigation controller here. We're just going to push this navigation controller, or excuse me, we're going to push the newly created view controller onto the stack. And that will only be if the user is in fact signed in. So we can do a guard statement here. And the way that we can check this is on the Firebase Auth. There's this current user property. If it is null, then the user's not signed in. So we can do that. So that will ensure that the user is in fact signed in using the Apple with sign in with Apple and our credential. And then we'll pass the information here if we call the function has account. Now we're within a block here. So this is good practice to write out weak self, just in case for some reason we might end up with some memory issues. We can just say self dot has account. We'll pass in our parameters, first name, last name, and email. That'll come down here and verify that the user signed in. And then if they are, we'll move to the next view controller. And that should be all you need to do for this. So this will get it all set up. And again, our button is still just on the screen here. And when they click on it, you'll see the sign in with Apple flow. You can do it on a simulator. I think you just have to sign in to your iCloud account on the simulator. So yeah, we should be good. Thanks for watching, and I hope that was helpful.